Hello and welcome to this conversational chat with myself and a few of my friends. My name is Matthew Hopkins. I'm the pastor at Thornhill Church in North Cardiff, and I'm fairly new up here. I'd experienced before there with churches mainly in Swansea, but joy now to be up in the Cardiff in the capital city, originally from the valleys. But here and now. And this is something called lockdown leadership, in which we as Christian leaders in the UK are just having a conversation, having a chat, and kind of adding to what's going on here. And hopefully it's going to be helpful, beneficial, specifically for church leaders, but also Christians in churches to listen, to be encouraged, to be equipped and challenged in this time that we're currently in the COVID season. And so, yeah, what we're going to do is we're just going to have a bit of dialogue with one another and ask some questions and have a bit of hopefully a little bit of a laugh together, and also maybe pray right to the end. So we invite you into this journey, into this conversation, and hopefully it'll be really beneficial for everyone. So I'm going to introduce my mates now, and with this joy of technology, we're praying as well that nothing goes wrong and my webcam doesn't fall off, or my boys don't come in their pants during this time and jump on me or anything like that. But yeah, I'm just going to hand over to these guys, and they're going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to go from there. So over to Martin first.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be with you on this call, and good to be part of it. Thank you for your invite. So my name is Martin Irwin. I originally hail from Northern Ireland, from Northern Ireland, but I'm basically in England, been here for 25 years, and we were involved in planting a church in Hereford, but now I lead the work as CEO of Counties, which is a fellowship of evangelists and church planters in the United Kingdom. And we're also involved in the leadership of a local church here in Melksham in Wiltshire. So great to be on the call. Married to Rachel, I think I said, but we got 3 girls, 3 daughters, one of whom is in Swansea doing nursing.
That's a nice link over to Phil, actually. Go on, Phil.
Fantastic. Well, I'm a Welshman originally from Swansea. Married to Sheila. We've got 4 children. I got that wrong the other day, but I got it wrong right this time. 4 children, all married, and we've got 4 grandsons and 1 also on the way. Originally, I said, from Swansea, worked with Operation Mobilisation for about 19 years in England and in India, Bangladesh and Nepal. And then we moved back to Wales, and we've been working with counties as a counties evangelist, and also part of the leadership of a church in Swansea, in Dunvant, involved in various works in evangelism and revitalisation of churches, encouraging, supporting churches. Yeah, that's me.
And Steve.
Yeah, I'm Stephen McCoy. I grew up in Africa, actually Ethiopia, hence the charcoal drawings in the background. One's of a Danakil warrior. That's the area I grew up in. The other's a priest from the Orthodox Church. But I've been living in the UK since 1978. Worked as a nurse before going to Christian ministry with GLO. And I got to know these 2 guys through GLO, and also through counties that I'm also involved with in a number of ways. My wife Debbie and I live up here in Scotland, and we've got 3 children.
Brilliant. I was gonna thinking this is gonna be a full UK thing, almost like an Englishman, Irishman, and Welshman kind of weird joke. But I realised we've planted on 2 guys on the Irish island, but also because you live in England and Scotland, I think we kind of covered it all. So it's
I'm married to a Scot. I'm married to a Scot.
I was actually born in Chester. Because in one of my parents' missionary furloughs, we had nowhere to stay, so we stayed with an uncle in Chester. So I do bring the Englishness. I was there for 3 weeks before going back to Africa.
No one.
Funny
no
enough,
one.
you're the most English person I know, Stephen. To be fair.
Great. Yeah, just to kick off, there's been obviously a lot of people are afraid. There's obviously lots of people are losing their lives, and all of us want this COVID season to be over, and we're praying for this. But there are some encouragements as well in the church and in church leadership. And so, just to kick things off, can we all just share an encouragement that you have seen or experienced in the church, where you are experiencing with the church leaders, or things that you've seen online, or the church in UK? Whoever wants to kick off, you can go for it.
I'm happy to start with that one, because I'm actually hugely encouraged. We have GLO workers across Europe, and what has struck me is not just their determination, despite the challenges. And in Europe, the lockdown has been worse than the UK, a lot worse, and it began earlier. It's much more severe. But when I have regular contact with all of our workers, their determination to keep going and to do something is just it's joyful. One of our workers on the phone was last Friday, said to me, he said, not doing church isn't an option. And I guess that's been echoed in this country as well. And that's been coupled with creativity, but also I think with the Spirit moving in remarkable ways. One of our couples in a very difficult part of southern Italy, doing a church plant, and in a very difficult area where responsiveness is very limited. They had 3 contacts who were near the kingdom and not making any move until the coronavirus. And then I guess because of the fear and the sense of our mortality, they became Christians. And this church plant, which normally on a Sunday would number about maybe 30 to 40 people, are having 60 to 70 families tuning in online. Never happened before. Never had so many contacts before. And that all happened because of Corona. And this particular missionary, he's a Faroese guy who's living in Italy as a missionary. And he's talking about the digital mission field, because they're now reaching people they never could before, and it's because of the virus. So it is tragic. The death toll is awful. And it's heartrending to hear all the news. But you're right, it's not all gloom, and God has worked. God is working. People are being emboldened, and exciting things are happening, I think.
Well, one of our county's evangelists, a neighbour passed away, and of course, with the restrictions on funeral attendance, I think the funeral for the neighbour was maximum of 10 people, and the evangelist invited the neighbours to come and stand outside the front of their houses, and at the same time that the funeral was taking place at the crematorium, he led a memorial service with prayers and readings. And the neighbour who had passed away was a Christian, and 40 people, all of those who could have come out of their houses, came and stood on the front of their driveways, and he was able to share the gospel and share the faith of this woman. And that kind of thing, that kind of story could be repeated again and again. I'm sure we'll talk about more incidents like that, but that is such a thrill. A, the boldness of the evangelist, and B, the opportunity, and C, the responsiveness of people's hearts. Those kind of things have not been happening in my lifetime ever in the United Kingdom, and there's something of a move of God taking place under, not just under the surface, but bubbling up.
I think what you mentioned, Martin, you mentioned earlier in some other thing you were doing, that a percentage of people who are listening in. You want to quote that?
Yeah,
Vicar of Dibley, wasn't it, or something?
Yeah, it was produced in the Guardian newspaper over the weekend here in the UK. But Tear Fund asked Comres to do a poll, and the poll of the UK population showed that 25% of people in the United Kingdom have attended a Christian act of worship online during the season of lockdown. Mm-hmm. Now, if you think that it's 6% is an average turning up at least once a month in physical attendance in previous days, that's a remarkable number of people who are connecting with the gospel in this season. Absolutely remarkable. So yeah, that was yeah, the other bit was that they said the most trusted vicar that they would like to lead us through this season was the Vicar of Dibley. Father Ted came in third, which was a little disappointing. But good, that's good.
Yeah, I've just had we're setting up an online alpha course, and just had a text today from a lady, and who said, I've got 3 friends that would like to join, you know, and I know this particular person had struggled to come along to a physical alpha, but the online one is just maybe opening up opportunities. I think the other thing that really encourages me, though, is that churches are trying to do things. You mentioned, Stephen, creativity. They're doing something, and they're doing something very often in order to reach out to the community. And one of the things that's really encouraged me are folk that are tuning into some of the things that have been done, and not always fantastically. You know, we've all between us have had real problems with technology, and you should have heard my singing on Sunday, trying to do that live on Zoom. But the reality is that people are listening in. I had another text from someone who said, you know, what you're saying, though they don't attend church regularly or anything like that, but what you're saying is really encouraging me at the moment. So I think there are huge encouragements out there.
Yeah, and even up in Cardiff, we kind of, like you said, it's just kind of trial and error, isn't it? And it's just trying to be having a go. And we kind of started a 10 a.m. 40-minute Zoom prayer meeting, but also to see one another on a daily basis. And now that's like 7 days a week, and it's been going for 5 days. And it's not like legalistic, like, oh, you have to go or anything like that. It's a joy to see one another, and also a joy to be praying. So as a church, we've never been praying as much before. We definitely weren't praying this much before lockdown, and so it's definitely been an encouragement in regards to that. Like what you said then, Martin, about online views, I don't know about you guys, but before lockdown, we didn't do an awful lot on social media or YouTube or anything else, but now that's kind of forced our hand. And when you do that, you start to kind of come into this views game where you see how many views you get, how many likes you get, all this stuff. And so it's a bit weird. And then, like for instance, myself as a church leader, I like to follow or see other churches to be encouraged, but also steal their best ideas. And you can do that online. But then sometimes when you do that, you can then become a bit insecure. And now we're seeing more churches than ever before, and we can start thinking, oh, we're not getting as many views as they are, or we don't do this like that, or they look at their tech and all these things. And so as you guys know, lots of different churches, from smaller churches to big churches, what would be some advice that you would give people who may be feeling a bit insecure or kind of getting caught up in the views game? What would be some helpful things from you guys?
I think as long as I get more views than Phil Davis, my day is complete. So, no, I listen, Matt, I totally identify with it. I think we're all probably in those first few weeks. I'm amazed. Steve talked about the creativity. I think the innovation of evangelists and church leaders and pastors has been remarkable. But I think doing something, even if it's not brilliant, is better than doing nothing. And the challenge is, the church may not reopen after this season. I know we might go on to talk about some of that stuff, but having a presence, you might say, well, it's not physical presence, it's not, it's not genuine fellowship, it's not, hey, look, there are people in the world who have lived in this space, social media space, for a very long time. And I used to have a love-hate relationship with it. I go through seasons of being on Facebook or Twitter a lot, and then I kind of hate it, and I just not go on it for ages. But this, God so loved the world, and the world is engaging through this medium. This is a medium, and the message is what God's given us. So look, if you've got 300 views and someone's got 600, or you've got 50 and someone's got 30, praise God, that's brilliant. So yeah, we need to just judge our own heart and ask God to just give us humility in this season. But one of the things that helps me overcome it, you know, as I'm walking the dogs at night, I can sometimes get a whiff of someone smoking spliffs, and they got the window open, and it used to annoy me. And I used to think, you know, maybe I'll just phone the police and say they're like, the police would have been interested. But now I pray as I walk past their house. So when I walk past every night, I pray for them. And actually, when I look at other people's views, if I see good material, I share their material. I say, hey, have you seen this stuff? This is worth a watch. This is worth a listen. And it changes your perspective. So you're not protecting yourself. You're saying it's about the gospel. It's about getting connected with Jesus. So that's some of the things that I try to do.
Yeah.
Can I add to that as well? Because I do agree with what Martin has said. And I think that same temptation is in all of us. When lockdown's over, we'll also be comparing size of congregations on a Sunday. And how many of those online people will start coming to church or not. And it's always dangerous to be focusing just on my church or even my own personal ministry. And God actually spoke into my heart on this fairly early into the lockdown, because I did some studies online on Philippians. And when you're speaking to camera, it's a very different experience than speaking to a live audience. And we've all made a mess and had to record again and again. You guys know what that feels like. But I tried to imagine, and wanted my audience to imagine, whoever was listening, what it felt like for Paul. And Philippians really meant a lot to me during those weeks. And it's the section where Paul in Philippians is talking about his love of the gospel. And he's encouraged that some people are preaching the word of God more boldly. It's a beautiful passage from Philippians 1. And in the context of all of that, Paul recognized that some people in Rome are preaching the gospel out of spite to Paul. They're thinking, if we can get success in evangelism, Paul will be forgotten about in his prison dungeon. And Paul knew that, which didn't help his feeling of self-esteem stuck there in prison. But he then said, but what does it matter as long as Christ is being preached? And I wonder if one of the big lessons that we don't all derive from this is a theology of the universal church. Because I think it's exciting that all across the UK, all across Europe and the world, social media is being used and churches are trying what they can do, and people are becoming Christians. That's great. And we all share in that. And my sharing might get 10 views on YouTube. Someone else sharing that might get 1,000. But we're all part of that global sharing. And we're part of this universal church. We need to keep that theology in mind, that this is God's church, God's work. And all we're called to do is be faithful in this context, whatever that faithfulness looks like.
And I think it's true to say that, and at whatever age, because I was reflecting on this, and that in a sense, when I was younger, my sense of wanting to compare was much stronger, in the sense of that I was very aware, particularly if someone was doing better than you, and you grapple with that sense of pride and within your heart. And I'm not saying it's any easier now, but I think there is an element of what you just said, Stephen, that I was listening to a podcast by David Platt recently, from the Radical in the States, and he did, and I wrote it down, his 8 lessons for pastors. And one of his first lessons was just simply this verse really from 1 Peter 5, where it says, care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. And that really, really hit hard, in a sense. We want to care for others and we're seeking to support others. But there is another element which helps us with the area of comparison, is that God has given what I have in front of me, the fellowship that I'm part of. And that's what God has called me to care. Let's not worry about what's happening somewhere else down the road. No, that's in theory, okay? I'm speaking to myself with a reality here that that's not always how I feel, and I do check the views and you get sucked into that. But there is an element of truth that God has given us, and you're in your church and that individual elder in that particular church, that flock, however big or however small, is to take care of. And that's what he's calling for us to be faithful in doing, isn't it?
Good.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, and like you guys said, it's time now for us to open our eyes a bit more about church and look at the wider church and be encouraged. Even like when Phil then shared about Alpha Course, like we've tried that, but it hasn't taken off yet. But it's a joy to hear that people are signing up in Swansea for the Alpha Course. Like that's amazing, because like we want that in every church. Like, and if every church, if that happens in every church except the one I'm involved in, then it's still like a joy. Like we want God's kingdom to come, and to see like all of this is all sowing seeds. We're all trying, and also like we all can learn off one another. Anyway, like I'm from a family of pastors on both sides, and so like a normal family WhatsApp meeting, we're just like kind of sharpening one another, hearing one another, what works, what didn't work, and so it's all just beneficial for His kingdom and all of us having a go. One of you guys touched on it then about Martin. You said as long as you just have a go, as long as you try something, it's more than nothing. And some smaller churches in the UK now, it's almost double-sided. They could be like really struggling and think, oh, like we won't bother connecting, or we won't bother putting things out. We'll just let people maybe connect with other churches. But also they may have an advantage because they are smaller. Then they can look after the flock better and look after one another and care for one another, because there's less to do that. So in regards to smaller churches, what would be some of your encouragements or advice in this time?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kick off there. I think, I mean, I was on a conversation with Stephen the other day, and Stephen might want to reflect and say something about it. We were in a different meeting, and Stephen was talking about knowing a significant number of churches who were doing nothing. And I find that deeply concerning. There are older churches. In the first weekend of lockdown, I had a phone call from a guy, because my phone number can be accessible through County's website or through an answer phone message. A guy who I barely know from a little gospel hall in the West Midlands phoned me, and he said, you know, if I knew that people were breaking bread at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, I would have my bread and wine ready, and I wouldn't need to be on the phone or see them on the television or video. I would just want to know that I'm in communion with God's people. It really, really touched my heart that there are, you know, the people that God loves and Christ died for, and who love fellowship. You know, I grew up in a church where there were men and women who just loved to break bread, who loved to pray and be in a prayer meeting. So it breaks my heart that there are some smaller churches doing nothing. Now, what can you do if you don't have technology? Well, be phoning one another, be in contact with one another, you know, pray for one another over the phone. Some years ago when I was ill with, I came down with ME, with chronic fatigue, that encouraged me most and transformed me. There were two brothers, not physical brothers, but two brothers in Christ, who didn't know each other, but both of them at various times when I was very ill rung me and prayed on the phone with me. And it was the first time anyone ever prayed on the phone with me. And, you know, we've got telephones. So praying with one another, share the scriptures with one another, even if it's one-on-one in a small church of 8 or 10 people. I don't think there's any excuse for doing nothing. I find that really heartbreaking, that people who are in fellowship with one another may not be connecting. So that would just be a starter, but you know, there are other things too.
Yeah, I mean, even a simple thing of letting those in your fellowship, even if you aren't producing something in your own fellowship, there is, and I know there's a concern over that. Maybe Steve will want to jump in on that as well. But you know, in the sense of providing resources, even with a midweek Bible study, and most of many churches, I shouldn't say most, but many churches are using facilities such as Zoom or Teams or something like that. And there are facilities, and we know it's happened with us, where individuals who don't have internet, who don't have any access to YouTube and live and all those sort of things, are still phoning in and being part of prayer meetings. There was an assembly just down in South Wales who I was doing a little service for them on Zoom, but they had about 4 or 5 people that were just on the phone listening. So and that was so encouraging, and they really are making an effort to do something.
Yeah, I think that a principle here, which will be true once lockdown is over, is don't try to do something that you're never going to be able to do credibly, but play to your strengths. And you might not have the technical know-how to use a Zoom platform. That's going to be possible with some very small elderly congregations, but they're used to phoning each other. They're used to having a strong social link. And sometimes, including when it comes to outreaches, it's the simple things that can be very effective. I went round to visit a guy last week to take him some buttons that my wife had collected, and he's doing 2 things. Number one, he's doing shopping for older people, and just dropping messages off. And then when they open the door and he stands a few meters down the driveway, they want to stand at the door and talk to him because they don't get to speak to anybody. You know, what he's doing is essentially very simple and extremely low tech. But he said person after person on his estate, older people are all saying to him, "You're the only person I speak to." And then with the buttons, he used to do a long time ago schools work, and there's some craft things happening. So that's being used to give out to kids for craft stuff. Very simple projects that don't involve a lot of tech, and maybe don't take a huge amount of imagination, but it's a simple thing that will make an impact. And we just need to trust and believe that God will use the simple things that we can do, and not think of an all dancing, all singing social media platform if we can't do that. Do what you can do.
Yeah. I was just trying to think of how we redo messy church. Some churches are doing that. There's lots of videos and stuff you can send, I guess, via WhatsApp. But we heard another Brethren Assembly, actually, in Swansea, just very simply at Easter, put boxes outside. They'll all be made with gloves and gel, but boxes outside in packets, which included colouring pencils and some things to colour in, some chocolate, and invited the whole community just to go and take one from the box, you know. And they're not a large assembly, a good sized church, but they were just trying something of trying to, again, missionally reach out.
So I just jump in just to pick up on that as well. The church we were involved in Hereford, Challenge Community Church, they've decided to do 2 things. Well, 3 things, I guess. They've got midweek connections through life groups, and they are doing Zoom and sort of praying and sharing together. But Sunday morning, they're encouraging their church members to plug into other churches, and they're recommending good churches that they can plug into. But they're producing a resource, like an email. It's called Church with a Difference. And if you read down the email, there's a video you can click on. There's a craft you can do. There's some instructions. There's Church with a Difference for kids, Church with a Difference for adults, so a little devotional thought. And they're producing a children's and an adult version every week, putting it up on their website on a Sunday, emailing it to their members. So they're kind of weaving lots of things together, and it's brilliant. It's quite simple. It takes one person a lot of time, but actually it's not video based. It's not Zoom. You don't have to learn the technology. They're just weaving something. And when I read down it the other week, I thought it was brilliant and different to anything else that I've seen others do.
Right. Yeah, and also, like, with maybe some of the smaller churches, it may have some of, or majority older congregation in the smaller churches. But what I found is maybe the retired folk in our church are just massively encouraged to just stay connected. Like, they really appreciate anything. They aren't at all looking at you as though comparing you with them, and that they're just massively encouraged to just still be connected, to still to still be in fellowship with one another. And also, in a weird way, it's kind of part of denying ourselves as well. Like, I found that, like, I could happily live life without Facebook, like, easily. But I've realised a lot of people in my world, like, live on Facebook. And so, like, I've got to deny myself to be in this community. Like, that's where like the online streets that Jesus would walk right now. The physical streets, everyone's in the house. And so Jesus would be walking on those. And so it's been really encouraging to see some older people join Facebook. Like, they haven't got a clue, but they're doing their best. They're denying themselves, or being a part of a WhatsApp group with 100 people, and it's pinging, and they don't know how to mute it. But, like, they're denying themselves to be in fellowship. And that's what we want. We don't want the result of COVID for churches to close, and for people almost to have transferred growth through an online system. It's just encouraging every church, like, do all you can, even if it's just a phone call, because it's the relationships are the big thing. And if in our quiet times, if we're going after Jesus, like, he'll always put the church on our hearts, won't he? He'll always put the church on your heart. You can't go after Jesus and then it's almost like forget the church. You will always. And so, as churches, small or large, like, if we're going after Jesus in our quiet times, he will always put the local church on our heart, the one that we're part of. So do all you can, and do what you can, whether it's a phone call or whether it's a show with bright lights. Do it for your people, serve your people well. Almost on the opposite side then of maybe larger churches in the UK, in Wales, Scotland, and England, and further afield. In my experience, the larger the church, or the larger the numerical number in a church, then almost the larger the fringe of the church can be. So if you've got a church of 50 people, you might have maybe 5 or 10 people who are kind of not sure, maybe on the fringe, on the edge. But if you have a church of maybe 300 people, your fringe could be up to 80 people in that. And in this lockdown period, with these people who may be on the fringe of church, do you think that this will be a time where they choose, and so it's almost like, I've been on the fringe for a while, and so actually I'm choosing no? Or is this an opportunity for them to almost become part of the core of church? And should church leaders, should Christian leaders be focusing on the core, or should it still be thinking of the fringe as well? Let's go to Phil for that one.
I've been reflecting a little bit on this, because it is true. We know as we grow as a church, we've noticed that more and more people, for good reasons, we often, I know we've used the phrase before, but there's that sense of people are looking for belonging, and even before they believe, there's that sense of looking for community. I guess I would take the angle, I guess like some Jesus does in John 6. He continues to teach and disciple, and he leaves the choice to his disciples. And some, when his teaching becomes too hard and too difficult, some turn back. And then, when Jesus turns to his disciples, and Peter has that amazing phrase, and he says, "But to who else can we go? You've got the words of eternal life." So I guess I'm torn, if I'm honest, in a sense. There is an awful lot of discipling that needs to be done. I'm just conscious of those in their 20s and 30s in our fellowship, just long, and need to give more time. And you almost get zoomed out in personal contact meetings at the moment trying to do that. But it's so vital, so important. But then there's also that wider sense of people in our fellowships who and yeah, maybe they're not fully engaging in all that's going on during this period. You know, you barely see them in a prayer meeting, or you on the online prayer meetings now. But I still, my heart would still say that I'm called to care for the church, and if that at the moment is a larger fringe, perhaps because we're others who've gone away from walking daily with Jesus in their faith, but now they're coming. So if you know, like, the fringe is growing because of this particular. We need to delegate more and better as leaders in order to cope. I understand that, but I still feel it's probably important to continue to reach out, to have that big heart and recognize that. My son Nathan was using a quote yesterday of the parable of the sower, you know, and in the sense of when the weeds grow in the thorns and thistles growing, the persecution and difficulty. Well, I'm going to leave that to Jesus. Now, I'm not being so flippant there, but I've just got to concentrate on just doing the sowing and doing the tending the plants, as it were, and so on. But I know I reflect, and probably we'll have different thoughts and different sides, or maybe an opposite I thought to this on this question.
I think certainly larger churches will have their challenges. We're mentioning the challenges of smaller churches. Larger churches are not free of their own problems. And you might be able to put on a brilliant audio-visual show, but relationship is still a huge thing. And you're hearing that film, relationship is everything. And one of the dangers of folk on the fringe, and it'll include this new fringe, because lots of new folk who have never listened in before will do so because the virus is on. It's something different. The big question then is what to do with the new fringe, because there already was a fringe of folk who could meet but still stayed in the fringes. That problem will be accentuated with these new folk. And so I think that these churches that have been very successful at bigging up their numbers online will have a significant job to do to make sufficient connection relationally once the lockdown comes to an end or begins to get rolled back, in order to keep those folk and to keep those contacts live and living and meaningful, to build enough depth into it. The other thing, of course, that'll happen is people are being fed a diet, which they've now got used to. I spoke to one older gentleman on the phone who said to me, I'm really enjoying doing church online. He said, it'll be quite a thing for me to get up in the morning, to get in my car and drive to church once the lockdown's over. Habits form very quickly. We do need to be aware of that. And then, of course, another issue which I think big churches might face that we need to be prayerful about is what happens if the government, as they begin to relax the rules, say you can meet in groups of 50. Mm-hmm. That's okay for your wee gospel hall that has, you know, or the evangelical church in the street corner that has 25 people in fellowship. They can get back to normal quick as anything. If you are a pastor in that church of 300 people, you've got a lot of thinking to do that will not only impact your theology and make you reflect in your theology, it'll also make you think, well, what other habits do we need to sow in here that don't become so fixed that we can't undo them later on when there's a complete freedom set. So we need to pray for bigger churches. Their lives are very complex just now.
There's a danger. I mean, the church we're part of is a medium-sized church in the UK, you know, sort of Sunday attendance of 70, 80, 90 when we were able to meet together. So I guess that makes us, you know, sort of medium-sized. There's a massive challenge, and we've talked about it in our own leadership team. And that challenge is that we got to listen for what God is saying, and we've tried to reflect on that as a leadership team. What is God saying to the church at the moment? And there is a danger, and as an evangelist who's an activist, that I got to wrestle with this all the time. But there's a danger that churches who can be busy in the normal era are now just busy in the coronavirus era, but different busyness. And I wonder, is God just saying something about the busyness? You know, you're just all this activity, all of this, You know, are we in danger of being a fig tree with lots of leaves and no fruit? And you can be a busy church on the online world, just as you were a busy church in the actual world. And there's a question about that. It's to do with fruitfulness. What we've come to as leaders, and I actually think it's a national and a worldwide conversation, is what is God saying? And I think two things that look, I'm being very cautious here, because the last thing I want to do is pretend I'm speaking for God, but I'm just trying to, with you guys, wrestle what's God saying. And I do think it comes back to those two words, deep and wide. Someone quoted those on my Soap for the Soul thing this morning, as I mentioned it. God, I think, is inviting us into deeper waters with himself. But come and swim, spend time with me. That my prayer life and my devotional life has increased exponentially at the moment. But I know that there are Christians who are desperately struggling with this. And so the reason that they're connecting with Phil or with myself or with others on a daily basis is because they don't know what to do. Maybe there are people who just have lost the habit of reading the Bible, or were never taught properly just how to get into it. You know, we've got to be teaching and training and equipping people, not spoon feeding them, but telling them, this is how you read the Bible. This is how you get to know God. This is how you pray. Now is a season to drive yourself deeper into God. And if we don't do it now, we'll not do it until the day we die. And the second thing is, I think God's driving us into the world to go wider. And I do think that whatever activity we're engaged in must have the fringe at heart. So I'm not arguing against what you say, Matt. I thought it was lovely. You know, if we're pursuing Jesus, he'll put the church on our heart. I love that. But I think of Jesus' words on the beach to Simon Peter, after the resurrection, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. Well, what did Peter do on the day of Pentecost? Was that feeding sheep? I mean, it wasn't pastoral care. He preached the gospel and 3,000 people came to Christ. Is that not feeding sheep? I think that was Peter fulfilling the call that Jesus gave him on the beach. So my sheep are not the 60 or 70 people who turn up when we physically can meet. The sheep that God has given us is the town, the community, the region that he has asked us to care for. How do I care for those sheep? Most of whom are lost and out on the hillside and not in the fold. So encourage those in the fold to go deeper. Give them the tools to drive into God. And let's take the church wider, so we stop thinking about ourselves and start thinking about the lost. So those for me are the two things I'm trying to wrestle with.
That's brilliant, actually. And maybe Phil and Steve just think about what do you think God is saying? Because what you said there, Martin, if anyone from Thornhill Church was watching, they would almost feel that me and you have had a secret conversation beforehand. But trust you guys, I never speak to this guy. I try to avoid him. But God gave me a word for the church at the start of the year, and it was those three words, deep and wide. But he gave me the phrase, if we focus on the depth, God will sort out the width. And so if we go after the depth, if we go deeper in him, God will look after the width. Because I feel it's almost, again, maybe another insecurity, but a lot of churches are obsessed with width. If you meet someone and they say, and you find out they're a Christian, they ask you two questions: "Oh, what church are you?" And then the second question is always, "Oh, how big is it?" It's always those two questions. It's always "Oh, what church are you?" and how wide you are. But for me, God said, and I thought at the start of this coronavirus season, a lot of churches are excited and still are, and I still think we still need to do all that we can in evangelizing and putting our content out there and sharing the gospel. We need to do all that. But it's almost, that's what I kind of thought at the start. But if anything, for me right now, it's well, who wants to go deeper? Who wants to go after God and grow in this time when they're on their own, like you said, Martin? And maybe as churches we've done a bit too much on the group side of things, and so we're totally reliant on ourselves when we're with one another. But when when we're in a secret place, when we're on our own, we've lost the simplicity of simply meeting with Jesus. And that's what we need to like kind of get back into. So we're all in it. So we're all meeting Jesus on a daily basis. Phil, Steve, let's go with Phil first. What do you think God is saying, Phil?
I mean, it's very similar in the sense of that I kept, we do a daily email, probably cut it down to 3 times a week to the church now. So, but it's been useful to be able to, you know, put some scripture in or whatever. But one of the things that strikes me is that the words of Jesus to his disciples when he called them is, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." So those 2 things have to be there. So how do we grow deeper in the following? And then that translates it immediately to in the sense of, well, how do we become fishers of men? And so within the email or the newsletter, I'm constantly saying, what does it mean to become missional? Or the phrase we're using, we see the church as a beacon. Okay, so the beacon, as it begins to grow, that light begins to develop. Those beacons, to use the example during the Second World War or during the Spanish Armada, was it that the beacons that spread? So we have to be, maybe this is the evangelist in me, I don't know, but I think it's that constant, the deep and wide. It's the follow me and I will make you fishers of men. It has to be part of the DNA of a local church. That in a sense of, well, where is God taking you? Where? And one of the things you asked us, Matt, about a theology of church, mine would simply be that we are being challenged as in Dunban. We're a medium-sized to a large-sized church now, I guess, in some ways. But this could be the crucial time that God is pushing us to say, okay, in your following me and you're fixing your eyes on me, how do you now translate that to reach the communities that people are being drawn from, physically communities? So in a sense, well, if the government breaks down the lockdown in such a way that we are, as Stephen said, be able to meet in smaller groups, well, maybe it's going to shake, well, I believe it's going to shake us as a church in Dunban, just to ask that question, okay, well, what is God actually saying? What is your theology of church? Is it just about being bigger, bigger, bigger? Or is it about the light, in our case, the beacon spreading to another geographical area or to another community of people? It may not even be geographical, just be a new community of people amongst the rugby clubs or whatever it is. So maybe that's a little bit of what God seems to be pointing me to at the moment.
Yeah, I would endorse what both guys have said. I think there's some in a sense, fairly simple lessons that I would say I've been picking up. Like Martin, I wouldn't want to say that I'm expressing what God's voice is in this. But we all learn as we go along. And things that have really struck me as being significant. Number one is the importance of relationship in church. People, even though they have a brilliant online service, are missing just being with other people and sharing life. And it's not till you're deprived of that thing that you realize how precious that thing is, including just getting a hug. Yeah. Those simple issues. I think too, using opportunities. I have had, even in my own street opportunity, I gave John Lennox's book, Where is God in a Coronavirus World? I gave it to a neighbor yesterday. I've never really been able to have good chats with her about faith until this crisis. That's the very one. I couldn't show mine because I've given it away. Yeah.
You beat me.
I gladly accepted it, and it came from a conversation that I had with her out in the street when the lockdown first happened. And I asked her, how are you dealing with this? I found witnessing opportunities that I've never had before, but you have to take them. I think too, going back to what Phil said about a theology of church, maybe it reminds us that first of all, church keeps going on. It might take different shapes and forms. Now, that's a lesson the majority of the world have been learning for centuries. If I'm a Christian living in Afghanistan, then I've had to learn to meet underground. I've had to learn to be secretive about my faith. If I'm a Christian meeting in Croatia, or Serbia, or like a guy I met recently from Kosovo. He only is aware of 2 churches in the world. His own church, which is planted by an Albanian missionary, and he comes over to Albania for further training, and another church about half an hour drive away from him, which is of a different denomination, but he hasn't yet worked out what denominations are. All he knows is he's a Christian, they're Christians, and that's his norm. And he doesn't know of any other churches. He came over to Albania because I was doing some training there a few months back. And he's in the class, the Bible school class that I helped to teach on. And he just doesn't know church life outside of that limited experience. And I thought to myself, how do I explain denominations and all the arguments about his denomination to this guy who, I mean, it would be meaningless to him. Now that's their norm. We're maybe learning now under this virus that some of the stuff that we thought was important beforehand, including labels, doesn't mean very much. What is important is that we keep going, keep serving God, we keep encouraging each other, we see people become Christians, and we live out missional Christian lives in whatever situation God allows us to live through. And the rest is window dressing. And maybe we need to get rid of that window dressing and get back to basics.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating what the future could look like, because, well, especially more in like America and the other countries of churches that are thousands of people. But even if there's a lockdown, like you said, Steve, if they came to 50 people, of a church of 150 people, then you'd be thinking, all right, then let's just split it into 3, and like kind of, oh, how do we do all that? But then even if you split it into 3, there's no growth in that, then, is there? It's like you maxed out straight away on the 50, and so if anything, you go to 5 groups of 30, so like it was enabled to grow, and a bit of space as well on that. Maybe that's a conversation for another day, because I just want to finish off maybe with one more question for you guys. Thinking like spiritually as the church, and so as Christians in the church, so spiritually, but also numerically in regards to new Christians coming to faith. Do you think that this is a time just for the church to survive and do it well in both spiritual and numerical, keeping the church together? Or do you think this time can be a time where actually the church can thrive both spiritually and also numerically with new Christians coming to faith? And if it's the thriving option, like how can that happen? Like, how would you disciple someone who comes to faith online and you've never met them before? How do we as a church thrive and grow, not just numerically but spiritually together as family, even though we can't physically be together? We'll finish off. I thought we'd finish off with a light one.
I'll jump in. I'll jump in. In my lifetime in the West and in Britain, we've not faced persecution. We don't know what the future holds, whether that's something we will face. But I grew up on a diet in my teens of reading stuff like Brother Andrew, and reading about the church under communism and the church in China when the missionaries were forced to leave, and how they, the word of God was so precious to them. They could only have a few pages each. They kind of read them, then they passed them on. And I guess, there were seasons when they didn't know how big or how strong the church was. They didn't have the connections of social media, the internet and all the stuff that we have. But there's something of that for me that I think what we're going through at the moment is forcing us back to some very basic things. And I'm excited about that, because I think in small groups, when we can't meet in large groups, when we are able to meet, it might be in small groups. with Zoom and this interconnectivity, you can disciple people. You don't need to see someone physically. You know, pastors in the persecuted church passed their writings around, you know, and one household would have it, and then it would be passed on to someone else, and then passed on to someone else. And exponentially, those churches grew. I mean, unbelievable works of God. And even when people didn't come to overt faith, when communism collapsed, there was a rush to find out the gospel of Jesus Christ. Stephen mentioned Albania earlier, and that's a classic example, a complete shutdown country where lockdown was a permanent feature, where they declared themselves an atheist state. So I can't quite put those two and two together, but there's a wrestle in me that says we're in a season where God is inviting the church to grow. And it is back to what we said earlier, that deeper and wider. And I just echo with Phil, follow me and I will make you disciples of men. So those two things are, you know, absolutely hand in hand. I'll finish what I'm going to say with this and then over to the other guys. I had the privilege at the end of January of going over to Estonia to do some video teaching for a church planting training program called M4. And we were asked the question in a group like this, what is a disciple, in the context of how you make disciples? And I really believe that, and I've said this, and Phil might have heard me say this before, but I asked a question of some Christians a few years ago who got upset that we had non-Christians getting engaged in some church activity at a depth that they thought they shouldn't be. And I asked the question, when did Peter become a Christian in the New Testament? Was it when Jesus said, when he found him in John chapter 1? Was it when he said, leave the nets, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men? Was it when Peter declared, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God? Was it when Jesus breathed on them after his resurrection and said, receive the Holy Spirit? Or was it on the day of Pentecost? Now, unless you're a brilliant theologian, I guess you probably can't exactly answer that question. What Jesus invited people into was a discovering relationship where bit by bit they got to know him until they came to a full devotional commitment to Christ. And I believe the church should not have the kind of pre-saved and post-saved view of discipleship. Discipleship is an invitation to anyone and everyone to come and explore and follow Jesus. And I think if the church starts to wrestle with that, we stop drawing big black lines between, post and pre, then maybe we'll have a discipleship culture in the church that is radically different from the one that we're leaving behind.
Only thing I would just add is probably two. One thing is in a sense of, well, I think it's probably true, not just, I was going to say, for a personal and a church leader perspective, what does it mean to thrive? Because I was going to bring up the illustration of China as well, but I think is that word endurance or perseverance. And I think it's going to be true whether we're in a lockdown situation or when we're actually, as it were, a few months ago, we didn't know it was going to come. I think endurance and perseverance is absolutely crucial here. And as Martin has said, it's about that journeying and encouraging in my own life first, but also in the life of those who I'm discipling or those in my fellowship, which is a journey to God and a journey with God. And I think that's where that happens. I'll leave that to God, of where that moment, for some of it is in a moment, for some it's over a period of time. John Lennox I believe would say that he can't look back to a specific time. But it's that journey with God. I think I would say to us as church leaders, and we hate you putting that title on, but God has called us to lead or into eldership or whatever area of leadership. I just end with a story about Charles Simeon. I was listening to this podcast, as I mentioned, from David Platt, and he bases his talks on 8 principles for church pastors on the life of Charles Simeon, a pastor in the church in Trinity Church in Cambridge back in the 18th and 19th century. And when he went there at age 23 years old, he wasn't even allowed to preach in his old building because they didn't want him. So he was allowed to preach, in his old building, but they weren't allowed to sit in the seats. They had to stand in the aisles. And that went on for 10 years, and he kept on preaching. He ended up being the church leader, and I think many who listen to this are folk who've been in their church all their lives. And he was there as a church leader 54 years before he passed away. And it was that sense of endurance and just keeping going. And I think his motto for life is probably a great motto for us. I put it in our recent prayer letter. And his life motto was God in everything and in everything God. God in everything and in everything God. And I think that's a great principle of endurance and thriving, if I can say the word.
Yeah, I like that story, Phil. It's very powerful. I'm going to be slightly cynical here, and forgive my cynical tone coming. I'm Irish after all, like Martin, so cynicism comes easily. I think there are really significant things happening, and I'm excited by that. But when you read Revelation 1-3 and the letters to the churches, a phrase that gets repeated over and over again is this phrase, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." Is God speaking? I don't doubt that God is. And this is globally. I mean, the whole world, by definition, is affected by a pandemic. Very significant. The writer presupposes that we have ears to hear and we're going to use them, because you can have ears and still be deaf. And I wonder if in lots of little ways there are things that we are learning now, but you need to keep that learning. For example, families have been blessed by this. I've spent more time with my kids and my wife over the last 6 weeks than I probably have done in our entire married life. That's been a blessing. And it's challenged our family relationship. It's been good too. We've had some great times of just playing rummy cup at night or that kind of thing. It's been fabulous for families. And I think lots of families will have been enriched by this, very enriched. You have to keep that once lockdown's over. Churches who are desperate to see each other again, can't wait to be together. I think there'll be a honeymoon period once we go back, and it mightn't take very long before the same old bickering starts. Our wide appreciation of the gospel and what God is doing, blessing around the whole country, blessing around the world, fantastic. I wonder once lockdown's over, after 4 or 5 months, will the desire for labels come back into our thinking? I think we need to ask those questions now before we get to that point, because we only have one chance to get back to normal family life again. We only have one chance to get back to normal church life again, because we'll get back into the routine then. I only have one chance to really learn and solidify with these lessons. And we do need to be listening ears right now and reflect on this stuff before lockdown ends, so that we can be on guard for what seeds the devil might tear away from us after God has sown those seeds. Think of that parable that Jesus told. So I hope that's not too cynical, but I do think we need to be watchful and wise, celebrate the good, and make the most of these lessons before they're snatched away.
Yeah, definitely. And like the promise that Jesus said that he will build his church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. But then also, like, that's his global church, isn't it? But then also the letters to the churches in Revelation is like, if you don't change your ways, like, I'll remove your lampstand. Like, this is my church. Like, this is my church. And so hopefully, guys, hopefully I've enjoyed spending time with you guys. If you've been listening on this, guys, hopefully you've been encouraged, challenged, uplifted, and also a growing desire to go deeper as well, which I think that's been the central point from all of this, is for us as Christians to go deeper together, to go deeper into his word, to go deeper into the quiet room in our house, to go deeper into our marriages, into our families, to go deeper into our neighborhoods and in the service, and also to go deeper to the people who are seeking Jesus as well. So that's our prayer as a result of this, that all of us will have a desire to go deeper into Jesus as a result. So thank you so much to Martin, Steve and Phil. Yeah, hopefully you guys have been blessed through this. we want to call it like lockdown leadership and to try to be cool and stuff, but we're not. So we just thought this would be beneficial to you. Even though Phil today is celebrated May the 4th, and Steve McCoy is Justin Bieber's new manager. He's going to be going to the gym. All right, thanks guys. Bless you all.
Bless you. Thanks, Matt.
God bless.
God bless.
Thank you,
Take
Matt.
care.